I'm absolutely okay for you to, like just raise your hand if you want to speak up. However, just in the interest of time, I will also use some polls, and I would request you to like just check the chat window and answer those polls because that gives me the information that I need, to move ahead with this transition. So as we go into the session, so let me quickly switch over, and I hope you can see the slide. So I will very quickly take you through what change we are actually experiencing as a company. And if you have any questions, may I request you to just park it for the end. We will leave 20 minutes or so for questions. Or you can type up your questions in the chat window if you want to ask it just now. So we've been rethinking performance over the last year. And why we are, at this stage today is what, I will share first with you. If you remember, you've been, as employees, been participating in polls, a lot of surveys, engagement surveys, etc. One area that has consistently come up as far as performance management is concerned is that the way the performance management process ran until last year was good, but was not good enough to meet the needs of a changing workforce, a new talent landscape, etc. There were things that were working quite well in this process. As you can see on the left, timelines were quite clear. The approach was quite global, and we are a global company, so obviously that helped. We used to follow one process for everyone, and that definitely helped. Uh, the fact that all our goals and achievements were linked to our values and there was flexibility, that helped. But what was not working well, according to employee polls in Technip FMC, was that the goal setting process was starting quite late, at least the formal process. Cascading of goals to employees was happening, late. The link of my performance to business goals was somewhat not clear. It was a very time consuming process because you had to go and write your goals and you had to go and write your appraisal, self assessment, and then the manager had to. So there was a lot of administration around an important process. And then the system was, of course, found to be a little cumbersome for use. So, based on all of this feedback, what came out clearly is that going forward, what must change is that we need to have a very simple process to manage performance and give feedback. Secondly, feedback cannot be from single sources, which means that feedback may not always necessarily come only from your manager because you are working with more people than just your manager. You've got more stakeholders that you're working with. So, therefore, multi source feedback was considered to be very important. And not just was multi-source feedback considered to be important, uh, what came out in your responses to the polls was that the feedback had to be more continuous. So you couldn't possibly have goals at the start of the year and appraisal at the end of the year and nothing in between. The focus needed to be on individual development and on coaching. You believe that quality of conversations was more important, and finally, all of this, resulted in the fact that performance appraisals became more about the system or the rating, and we pretty much forgot about everything that lies in between. One crucial element about the previous system was it was a lot about the past, which means in December you would reflect on what happened between Jan and November. But as we know, there is nothing that you can do about the past. Um, but there's a lot you can do about the future because the past has already happened. But it's really the future that is in your control. So therefore, with all these objectives in mind, with all these issues in mind, the company decided to do away with the element of rating because the rating, which was supposed to be just the outcome of a process, kind of became the process in itself. And therefore, the whole idea of having a performance management process, failed. Which is why from this year, we have done away with ratings. But that does not mean we are doing away with the requirement to manage performance, with the requirement to assess, give feedback, and we will talk more about it. So it's very important for you to understand that by doing away with ratings, the process has got much more simple. Not necessarily the objective is being diluted. So that brings me to my first poll question, and if there is any feedback, etc., that you have right now, feel free to put it in the chat box, and we will address questions together in the end. While I put up the first poll question, also requesting all of you to use the Teams background that I have shared with you at the very top of this chat window before the session started, just so that it's in line with the context. And you are of course free to use this Teams background as we go by. So here's the first poll question. It should be in the chat window very soon. And just let me know once you've answered it, and then we'll move on with the next. Okay, so I hope you can see it. I can start answering. Again, I would just request all of you to respond quickly because, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just trying to get a sense of how much all of us know. It helps me to plan for the future. So don't worry too much about trying to be correct. Just respond intuitively, and then I think we are good. So we have about 32 people on the call. I only have 20 responses. Can the other 10 odd people respond to this? This being a round table, if we were all seated in a room together, I would do this with a show of hands. But because we're not in a room together, I'm having to use technology. So your response to it, 100% responses, will really help me to achieve most out of what I intend to achieve with all of you today. Okay, so I'll probably stop the poll here, but yeah, you're free to answer it if you want to catch up. So I think we are at a 50-50 in terms of knowing what a check-in is and not knowing. So that's okay. That's perfectly normal. I will share with you some resources as a follow-up to this conversation today, just so that you can read more. And we will also try and go through the POC page where a ton of information is already put up related to check-in. So I have two more slides, and after that, like I said, it's just going to be more about a conversation with all of you, and again more polls. So today is going to be a lot about polls. As I mentioned at the beginning, as to why the company resorted to a change process as far as the performance management cycle goes. The key one was simplicity, right? One of the things that we saw is that writing of goals used to take a lot of time, even after they were being cascaded from the top. And it was important that in the new world that we are in, and I'm not really talking about the new world as it has emerged in the last 2 years, but more the new world of the last say 10 years and where we are heading to. I think increasingly talent is expecting simplicity in areas that are not core to the day-to-day job. Anything that requires more administration requires to be simplified, which is why the aspect of goal setting itself has been simplified for all of us now, starting this year. Um, there is no significant, I mean, there is no mandatory requirement for you to enter, goals in the system, in the sense that you will see it a lot more simplified from a system perspective. A lot of fields have gone away. You can get your goals approved offline as well. The manager can also assign goals to you, especially in jobs that are very similar under the same manager. We've also eliminated the mandatory need for employees to have a self-evaluation because at the end of the day, the belief is that if the conversation with the manager, between the manager and the employee is ongoing, there is probably no need to formally record a self-evaluation at the end of this year, as long as there is some form of recording that is available and mutually agreeable between the manager and the employee. And finally, the idea is not to leverage only one system for purpose of managing performance, but to use several. So we have something called a talking talents program in the company where it's a formal platform for managers to come and present the talent under them, talk about their key contributors, talk about their critical talent. So the idea is that beyond just the PA process, the company wants to leverage on other platforms that are available throughout the year. Secondly, from an appraisal, so I think the mindset shift that we need to see is that from a performance appraisal mindset, we need to move to a developmental mindset. The reason for this is looking back at the past is not likely to change it, but using information from the past to plan your future, where the past is informing your future, is probably a more appropriate and a useful method. Thirdly, like I said previously, you need to have feedback, but the feedback needs to be multi-source and continuous. Because we are in a heavily networked world today. We are not only working with just the manager or just one team. We are working across the globe, across geographies, with a lot of people, and therefore feedback needs to come from various angles. And then finally, I think at the end of the day, your manager is going to be the most accountable individual to you in terms of giving you feedback. But again, the system kind of sometimes dehumanizes that. So the check-in process tries to personalize that whole conversation around performance, makes it more constructive, makes it more continuous. And finally, in terms of the alignment of goals, I think the key is that because we are in a fast-paced world, your goals are also changing in some sense throughout the year. The goals that you started to work on in January may not be your goals by July. Doesn't mean, and of course, if you're changing a job, if you're changing a role, that may be the case naturally. But even if you're in the same job, I think the needs of the job itself are changing so fast that a PA process must, kind of align to such an environment. So you now have the flexibility to adapt goals throughout the year, which means that goal setting is not set in stone. It can, it's fungible enough for it to be, changed through the year if there is a genuine requirement. And that allows you the opportunity to have an appraisal, or not an appraisal, but that allows you the opportunity to have a conversation that's more relevant to the goals you've set in, rather than referring to something that you did, that you entered, 6 months back. So that brings me to my next poll, because we are talking heavily about goals, and this is not a yes or a no. So you'll have to spend a little bit of time, answering, this one. And this is going to be related to goals. So please spend some time to just share with me, what do you think is working, well in when it comes to, setting up of, goals. So you should have the poll with you in a couple of seconds. Oh, sorry. I think there was some issue. So I'm gonna have to type it. I'm gonna have to type this out. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna have to type out the question here because somehow the poll is not working. So the question is, what's working well in setting up of goals today? When I say today, obviously your reference is the process that you've been used to. So just spend some time, maybe in answering that. But I would definitely like to go through all your responses, and I'll probably pick up a couple of them just to enhance the conversation today. But please spend some time in thinking about what's working well in setting up of goals today, as far as you are personally concerned. And this is a safe environment. The feedback that you share here, I acknowledge, may not just be your feedback. It may also be feedback from what you hear. So don't be too worried about being associated with the feedback you give. But do take some time out to tell me what's working well in setting up of goals today. We'll probably spend 2 to 3 minutes for this. So, as soon as you have your answers ready, please type it out here. I hope you're thinking about what's working well in setting up of goals today, and you can start typing your, uh, responses. Yeah, we've got Craig's, but do start typing up your responses. Like I said, the idea is to, crowdsource some thoughts, perspectives, so we are able to navigate through this change as a company smoothly. So please start typing your responses. Maybe we'll give it another 2 minutes. It's okay for you to just give a short answer if you would like to, but do share your perspective. The question that we are trying to answer is what's working well in setting up of goals today? And probably we'll give it another minute. We've got a couple of responses, but would definitely appreciate more, especially from those of you who have probably gone through a couple of performance cycles already in the last, say, 2 years or so. So yeah, I mean, just give some perspective so we are able to discuss that. The half a minute is what we will take and then get back to the discussion. Okay, so you can continue to answer this question in the chat box because I do appreciate any perspective that can be shared by you, but we will just continue the conversation for now. So I just probably want to pick up some responses, and then I think I'll use all the information here later. So Craig mentioned that flexibility to open, close, or edit at any time is a big step forward. And I think, that's probably a thumbs up to what we are doing. Uh, the HR web tool is definitely simpler, though it's an extra step to maintain when most organizations are rolled out and followed up by other means. I agree, and that's most likely the way we are going ahead as an organization too. Of course, we're not doing away with the tool right now, but I think the PA process by itself will get simpler and more agile. I think much lighter as you go by. So I think some steps have been taken just now, but you will see more. I think Saurabh makes an interesting comment on smart setting of goals and how that can be personalized. So just to clarify, Saurabh, uh, when we say personalization of goals, it doesn't take away the smartness of the goal. So setting up of smart goals is appropriate whether it is a goal that's coming to us top down, or whether it is even a personal goal back home. It's just a system. It's the way. It's the how of the PA process. So even in a personalized goal, effectively what would happen is the focus of the goal setting process will be the individual, the job, and not so much organizational goals, which are difficult to contextualize. So of course, organizational goal has to be contextualized to the individual, but the goal that I finally enter on the system has to be something that's very, very personal to me and what I do in the company. And that is the what of it. The how of it is really the smart setting up of goals. So I think smart setting of goals by itself is a great concept to talk through, and I'm sure all of you know what smart setting of goals means. Otherwise, just put a pin on it, Google it up, and I think smart setting of goals is one of the oldest and the most effective ways to actually set a goal. In short, it is about being specific, measurable, realistic, and time bound as far as goal setting is concerned. I will, of course, make it a point to go through all comments that I receive. The question that we were trying to answer was what is working well in today's goal, setting system, right? My next question, which is a follow up to the same question, is a contrary to the first one, which is I'd like to know from you what is not working well in setting up of goals today, right? So let me just type that out for you so we know. Yes, right. So similar context, but just the other way around. That what do you think is not working well today when you are setting up your when you are setting up your goals? Where do you think it suffers from limitations? Where do you think it is not linked to reality? Where do you think it is actually preventing you from doing a good job? So take the next couple of minutes to just think about, and of course, we don't need very long answers. Even short points is okay, and we'll try and elaborate on that. If I don't understand, I'll ask. But what do you think is not working well in setting up of goals today, as far as you are personally concerned, or maybe feedback from your peer group? Go ahead and just type out your responses in the chat window. Okay, maybe another minute. The question we're trying to answer is what is not working well according to you in the setting up of goals today? Okay, maybe half a minute to go. Any other responses? We have a large group, so I'm really hoping we have more feedback coming our way. Okay, so while you continue to type out your responses, and feel free to answer the current question, which is what is not working well. But if you want to go back and answer the previous question, just try and use the reply option, so I know which question you've answered. Especially if you're answering after now, we will just try and get going with the conversation. So I think Satyanarayana, pinned it right. Lack of 360-degree feedback. Increasingly today in the world, we are working in a highly networked environment, which means there are a lot more people than we imagined who are contributing to our performance and our success. The current system obviously suffers from a lack of 360-degree feedback. And I will therefore my next topic is going to be about feedback. So we will try and cover that and probably just pick answers from people who haven't answered in the past. A tangible outcome, Alex said tangible outcome, which is far exceeds in a decision is missing. So essentially, if I interpret it correctly, the communication as to why somebody is meets or an exceeds or a far exceeds is not very, very clear. Success criteria, Deve says success criteria is not very well defined. Um, Future career path, Nishikanta is talking about a future career path is not clear in goal setting. So just for clarity, and I think somebody did comment on, yeah, I think Craig commented on separating performance and development goals. And I think while that's a great idea, we'll have to remember that targeting only one of these may not always be the best of methods to manage our careers and growth in the organization. I think my current performance and the development I get on the job is very, very interlinked. And therefore, when you are talking about performance, one must also talk about how am I going to develop. And when both of this happens, probably you're more likely to experience meaning in the job versus just talking about performance and maybe separating out of development. But again, it's a good idea to have a singular focus when you're talking about performance. Talk about performance, but use a lot of those inputs when you're having developmental conversations, right? um, I think Varun talks about priorities changing depending on scope and challenges, lack of feedback, goals set at the start might not be relevant. Absolutely. And while these are challenges, Varun, therefore, what is important is that as an employee, I always know what is my goal. The fact is, in today's world, my goals will be changing, not too frequently, not every other week, but it's highly possible that I may have at least more than two or maybe three unique set of goals set for me during the year, just based on the kind of work I'm doing in the company today. And that is the nature of how organizations are functioning today. It's a very, very fast-paced environment. So the question is not whether, at least according to me, the question is not whether we should have changing priorities or not. The question is, how do we manage changing priorities in a way that is useful to you as an employee and is not detrimental to your interests, right? A lot of you have actually commented on feedback. So I think Varun said lack of feedback. Devesh said lack of feedback. Satyanarayan said lack of feedback. So that brings me to my next poll, and then probably I'll take a break from polls. But I just want to know, and this is a poll, so you don't have to answer anything in writing. Um, Tell me, how do you receive feedback today? Do you receive it verbal? Is it written? Is it both, or you don't receive feedback at all? What does this group feel? Uh, yeah, the poll is right in the chat window just now. Okay, just 10 responses. So just think about how do you receive feedback today? Okay, I think pretty much most have responded. Uh, and I'm pleased to see that nobody's saying they don't receive feedback, but the way I interpret that is what you mean really is that you probably when you meant in the chat window, some of you that you're not there's lack of feedback. I'm probably assuming it's lack of quality feedback, but all of you are receiving feedback in some form or the other today, and that's what the results indicate here that while feedback is mostly both, but a large section of you are receiving feedback in a verbal manner. One thing I would like you to ponder upon here is it almost seems like one third of you receive feedback verbally, yet there is this impression that there's lack of feedback. You may want to evaluate for yourself and then probably discuss with your manager whether verbal feedback is appropriate between the two of you or not. It is possible that some of you may actually prefer to see feedback in black or white. It is possible that your manager may not be the best of writers and he or she may be better at speaking. But is this your feedback orientation or not is something that you'll have to self evaluate and communicate with your manager in terms of how would you like feedback to be given to you. Not everybody is comfortable with verbal. Some people actually like written, and for some people it's exactly the opposite, where they do not like to get written feedback. They prefer feedback when it is more casual. So therefore the takeaway for you is there is no right or wrong method of receiving or giving feedback. It's really your personality, your manager's personality, and a midway between both. So do let your manager know if the current feedback mechanism, the way it is, especially if it is verbal, uh, is okay with you, or if you would like to see improvements in that. That brings me to my next slide, and we will try and like at least finish the polling and the presentation in the next 5 or 6 minutes, and then open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you can type it out, or you can probably just raise a hand, and then maybe you can like talk through the question. Um, I hope you can see this slide, which is really the last slide that I have for this, and then I have a couple of poll questions, to go. So finally, what is changing? I mean, yes, we are moving away from ratings, but is that the only change? Not really. I think the whole culture of performance management, giving and receiving feedback, and then using a lot of that for rewards and recognition, that itself is changing. So what is changed? The current atmosphere is on the left, and then where we are getting to in 2022 is on the right. So clearly, the way forward is that our managers, and of course, by extension, that means our employees will be a lot more accountable and empowered as far as managing performance goes. From a static process of having a meets expectations or a far exceeds or exceeds, we are moving to a continuous dialogue and a more flexible goal setting process. In the current process, there's a lot of comparison with others that occurs by design, because when you rate somebody as met, uh, you are able, or when you rate somebody as exceeds, probably somebody could potentially be rated as a met, relatively speaking. So that goes away, because I think in an ideal and a good performance management organization, comparison with self is probably the only way to improve performance levels. The current process looked at facts historically. The new process looks at facts in a more forward-looking manner. Clearly, I think the biggest change is that you're not when you have just three ratings to use, or or maybe 4 ratings to use, there's very little differentiation that is available between that you can do between employees. Whereas in a ratingless environment, you are able to actually differentiate in much more meaningful manners and not label people with one of the 4, ratings. And finally, there was sometimes a bad practice of assigning higher ratings to people so that they would get better rewards and better bonuses. But I think at the end of the day, any good forward-looking organization uses a more scientific budget-based process. So we do away with ratings, which also ensures that the allocations that we do on rewards are a lot more consistent. That brings me to my next poll, and I think with that we should be done and then really, take questions. Um, Give me a second while you answer this poll. So my next poll is also related to feedback, and I would like to know that when you receive feedback, is it because you're doing well? Is it because you are not doing well, or are you getting feedback in both situations, right? So just take a look at the poll. All right, the poll is up. So when you're answering this, think of general situations and not very specific. So in general, do you receive feedback when you do well? In general, do you receive feedback when you don't do well? Or do you always find a balance between uh, how the feedback comes to you? And feedback is not just your manager. Remember that, like I said, we are in a highly networked environment. So it's across stakeholder groups. Okay, I'm glad this one question got the fastest response. So I'd like to believe it's a very, very intuitive response that you have given. And it's good to know that at least more than half of you get balanced feedback. And I think that's a great element of our culture, that what you're telling me right now. And then, of course, this is a smaller group, but I'd like to believe that this is an extension. I mean, the results are an extension of what most would feel. So it's good to know that the feedback is balanced. Of course, some of you feel that it is not in balance. You get feedback only when you're not doing well. And that, of course, requires some work. But largely, since all of you represents very heterogeneous teams, it's good to know that you perceive the feedback process to be a balanced one in today's environment. Uh, we are just left with 10 minutes. So, before I come to my last question, which is going to be an open-ended question, uh, I'd like to take some from you because I've been polling you too much. Please raise your hand, or you can type out your question here in the chat window, and maybe you will use the next 5-7 minutes to answer those, and then move forward. So I will. Yes, yeah. So please raise a hand so then you can get started with your question, or just maybe unmute yourself. Hopefully, it will not be too chaotic. Yes, Craig, please go ahead.
Hi, Niranjan. Yeah, I think I've seen in some of the messaging around the campaign and the change in the process. I think the emphasis on employees to go and request the check-in on that quarterly basis, and the guidance is certainly very clear that it should be a kind of minimum quarterly frequency. Is that a deliberate attempt to change the emphasis or ownership of who drives that process?
I think absolutely yes, Craig. I mean, we've always said that your career is in your own hands. It's your ownership. I mean, I'm saying your, not in terms of not responding just to Craig, but I own my career as an employee, and my current performance is a great a feeder to how my career goes. So I think the ownership of managing performance also has to transfer to the employee, and the check-in process takes one big step in that change in culture. So while the ownership is with the employee, the manager's role is more facilitative. The manager is not going to necessarily have to determine what your goal needs to be, as long as you are aware of the organizational goals. The manager is going to not play the role of actually specifically writing down what you should do in the company. I think that change in ownership is happening slowly but steadily to the employee, but it's a culture. It's not something that we will achieve in the next 2 months. But yes, the way forward is that employees need to own their performance as long as the larger objectives are clear.
Excellent, thanks.
Any other questions? Would love to get some questions from all kinds of groups of employees. So I see we've got GTs here. I see we've got people who've been working for about 4 to 5 years. And then, of course, I also see people in the group who have been working for 10 plus years. So would love to see, a diversity of perspective coming up. So any GTs? I mean, you just joined a couple of years back, or maybe this is still your first year. What kind of questions do you have as a group that has just started working in industry? No questions? Then no questions. It tells me that either I've been fantastic and I would love to take that feedback, or it just means that I need to repeat the same session with all of you for the next 1 hour. So the choice is yours. Either tell. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. When we said feedback through different areas, different people, so how are we going to consider with people we are working outside? How does that feedback is going to come?
Okay, good, great question. Saurabh, right? Was that
Yes.
Saurabh?
Yes.
Okay, great question, Saurabh. So I think technology is what we need to use. So I don't know how many of you have been to the POP page or HR Web recently, but there is a new tool called the feedback tool, which can be used to give feedback, to your peers and stakeholders. So the good thing about that tool is that it records feedback on demand, and in the in the context that you're asking for it. So it does not have to wait till December. So feel free to leverage technology. It's also a great system of record, because then you just get to put your feedback in the system, and then you can choose whether you want your manager to see that feedback or not. And of course, you can use a collection of all these feedbacks towards the end of this year to actually reflect on your performance, through the year, and you can use that for a conversation with your manager. So yeah, just leverage technology. The other thing, of course, I would say, because most of this group is working in the same country, is that generally we find that there are cultural contexts to seeking and giving feedback. In India, typically we see trends where we don't seek enough feedback. We are very shy to seek feedback. Similarly, we are very shy to give feedback also. Um, while I'm very happy to see that you are getting balanced feedback, both on the pluses and the minuses as per the poll. But in a lot of other researches conducted, we are more likely to give bad feedback than we are likely to give good feedback, right? So it's probably a little cultural. So don't be shy. Uh, when you work with somebody on a project or at the end of the project or the middle of the project, wherever, just go ahead, be bold, and ask people, what do you think of me? What do you think of what I do? Don't be shy. And also make sure that you're not always asking feedback from people who are your peers. Ask feedback from people who are above you. Ask feedback from people who are below you, right? When I say above and below, I mean it in terms of, the work that you do in the organization. But your feedback has to be very diverse, coming from different angles, right? So simple messages: don't be shy, be bold, go and seek feedback, proactively seek feedback.
That helps. Thanks.
Okay. If there are no questions, I will come to my last question, and then, because our session is scheduled only till 3, those of you who have other meetings can leave. I don't mind staying back for another 5 minutes or so. If there are questions, I can take those. So my last question is, what is your concern? Probably, what is that one concern that you have with a rating-less environment from 2022, right? So I'll type it out as well, but what is your one concern about a rating-less environment, rating-less process, or whatever you may want to call it? Okay, so go ahead, answer that. And while you think about your answer, I do want to thank all of you for attending this session. As I mentioned at the beginning, the objective of the session is, one, to give you a very short introduction to what's changing. And the long information is there on POP page. So I encourage all of you to go to the POP page on the check-in page. There's a ton of information, and I've consciously avoided repeating what is already there online on POP. And second objective was to obviously crowdsource some ideas and perspectives on some of the questions that I've been trying to answer as well, right? So thank you very much for attending the session, and I look forward to all of you helping us as a company to navigate through this change as smoothly as possible. So before you go, do answer that question on what is the one concern that you have about a ratingless process, and you can type out your answers here. I'll still continue to be on the call for another 5 minutes. If anybody has questions, happy to take them. And at 3:05, I will leave the meeting. So I think in the interest of, I'm sure this question comes up to everyone, which is that how will we manage drive payout? So the drive payout will be managed exactly the way it happens today, except that there is no rating, which means the way it happens today is that every manager gets a budget and a range, and the same manager who is so far has been giving you a rating and has been differentiating your performance will continue to differentiate your performance, except for the fact that there is no label of a rating there, but your manager knows you best, and therefore your manager will continue to differentiate, and use the right range, the right figure for you, and make sure that people who are performing better than the others are rewarded better than the others, and people who are performing at the average are rewarded at the average. But a lot more empowerment is now in the manager's hands to make sure that they, they reward people appropriately. It may not be like averages, and answering Nandakishore's question, it's not uh, it's not it's not good, or it's not ideal for everything to be averaged out, because if our rewards are averaged out, then over a period of time, our performance will also just become very, very average. It's crucial that managers continue to differentiate performers. The only element that is going to be missing is is a rating per se. But otherwise, the philosophy behind rewards remains intact. In fact, if anything, it just goes stronger because now the manager has a lot more empowered, culture to be able to make the right decisions. All right, so yeah, the meeting is ended. I'll be on for the next 2-3 minutes to take any last questions, and I think looking forward to seeing all of you as we navigate through this change. Thank you.